I'm Alex Morgan, 28 years old, and until tonight, I had nothing to my name. No job, no car, no fancy apartment, nothing. It was a Friday evening, and the entire family had gathered at my parents' house for dinner. The table was crowded with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of warmth that somehow always felt like it skipped me. "Alex, still looking for a job?" my cousin Mark asked, smirking as he stabbed his steak. "Maybe try literally anything at this point." Laughter erupted around the table. My mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and my dad, who normally avoided embarrassing me publicly, just sighed and shook his head. My younger sister, Emily, giggled in that way siblings do when they're entertained by someone else's misfortune. I forced a smile, carefully chewing my food, but inside, a storm was brewing. I had heard these words 1,000 times before. I had felt the humiliation build like a slow fire every time they compared me to my high-achieving relatives, my so-called golden cousins, or even my younger siblings who seemed to stumble through life with a safety net while I scraped by on determination and self-taught skills. "You know," Mark continued, leaning back and twirling his wineglass, "it's amazing how someone can graduate college, be smart and still, well, do nothing." I laughed along politely, but my mind was racing. "Do nothing?" I repeated silently. "Do nothing? Just wait. One day, they'll see exactly what nothing can become." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of mockery and backhanded compliments. I made small talk, nodded, smiled, and internally catalogued every insult, every laugh, every dismissive glance. By the time dessert came, a chocolate cake that smelled sweeter than my patience, I had made a silent vow: they will regret underestimating me. I left the table early, saying I had a headache. Once, in the quiet of my small car, I let the anger fuel me. This wasn't just embarrassment, it was motivation. I would rise, not for them, not for validation, but for the undeniable satisfaction of proving that the person they laughed at could become the one they answer to. That night, as I sat in my studio apartment, I opened my laptop and began researching startups, investments, and business strategies. I didn't know exactly how I would do it yet, but I knew this much: they had given me the perfect reason to succeed. I spent hours reading, watching tutorials, studying successful entrepreneurs, and taking notes. Every story of someone who had clawed their way from nothing became fuel for me. I was building not just skills, but a vision, one that would one day put me in a position of undeniable power. I thought about them, the laughter, the smirks, the subtle dismissal, and smiled quietly. They had given me the blueprint of their arrogance, and I would use it against them. Their doubts weren't a setback. They were an advantage, a secret weapon I would wield carefully, and succeed I would. One day, I whispered to myself, closing the laptop with deliberate calm, one day, they'll all work for me. And when that day came, they wouldn't just see me succeed, they would. I spent the next few months doing what most people in my position would call grinding. It was a blur of late nights, obscure online courses, and small freelance jobs that barely paid enough to cover my bills. I rented a small, overpriced apartment in a neighborhood that was barely tolerable, but it was enough for now. I didn't need comfort, I needed a foundation. The first real breakthrough came when I stumbled across a forum for aspiring entrepreneurs. The members were a mix of dreamers, hustlers, and old veterans who had made their mark in the business world. It was here that I met Michael, an older man in his 50s who'd built and sold several successful companies. He didn't look like your typical business guru, no polished suit, no flashy car, but his words were wise and his experience palpable. "I see something in you, Alex," he said over the phone after our first long chat. "You've got the fire, but you need structure. You need guidance." It felt surreal. Here was someone who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. Michael wasn't just a mentor, he was the missing link I needed. He guided me through the steps of business formation, branding, and how to think strategically. But he didn't hand me success on a silver platter. He pushed me to think for myself, to learn every detail, and to build slowly. That's when I had my first real taste of what success could be. A small startup idea that I'd been toying with began to grow, quietly at first. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I kept it low profile, knowing that the last thing I needed was for my family to catch wind of it. They still saw me as the failure at the table, and I had no intention of giving them ammunition to ridicule me again. By day, I worked relentlessly on my business idea. By night, I dove into learning everything about the corporate world. The more I learned, the more I realized how little my family knew about what it took to run a business. My cousins, Mark included, were comfortable in their corporate jobs, but I began to see cracks. They were climbing the traditional ladder, but they weren't innovating. They were stagnating. Mark, for instance, had recently landed a role as a junior executive at some tech firm. He strutted around with his business talk, flaunting the title as if it were a crown. But what Mark didn't realize was that I was already eyeing the company, and I could see exactly how I'd take it apart. Their management structure was inefficient, their product development slow, and most importantly, they didn't listen to their customers. I started working on my own product. It wasn't revolutionary yet, but it had the potential to disrupt the industry. I wasn't trying to be flashy, I was focusing on substance. Every detail was meticulously crafted, every customer interaction analyzed. My startup, which had once been an idea in the back of my mind, was slowly gaining traction. But I still needed capital. It came from an unexpected place. An old family friend, Dave, had recently retired from a successful career in finance and had been looking for something to invest in. I reached out to him, not mentioning who I was. I didn't need him to see me as Alex, the underachiever, but as a potential business partner. He agreed to meet, and after a tense pitch, he offered me the initial funding I needed to expand. "Keep this between us for now," Dave said, shaking my hand. "The world doesn't need to know who you really are yet. Make your mark first, then let them know." He didn't need to tell me twice. It was exactly the opportunity I'd been waiting for. With Dave's investment, I was able to scale up my operations, hire a small but talented team, and launch a prototype that I knew had potential to change the game. Meanwhile, my family was still oblivious. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine: Mark's new corporate role, Emily's engagement, my mother's persistent worry about me never finding my path. They continued to treat me like the family screw-up, and I continued to keep my silence. Then came the moment when my product went live. The response was overwhelming. Orders began to pour in. We'd hit a nerve in the market, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the company I had started, my company, would attract the attention of larger investors. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself and to my family that I was capable of far more than they'd ever imagined. I knew that soon I would have the resources and the reputation to go after the next step, acquiring companies. And that's where things would get interesting. As my business took off, I made one key decision. I would target companies that my family worked for. Mark's company was first on my radar. I wasn't interested in buying just any company, though. I wanted to buy companies that had the same weaknesses I'd noticed in my family members' workplaces. Companies with flawed leadership, poor morale, and an inability to innovate. It was going to be my silent revenge. Mark had no idea that the very company he'd been so proud of, the one he bragged about at every family gathering, was about to become mine. I wasn't going to just beat them at their own game. I was going to own the game. I sat back, staring at the email I had just received from an investor who was interested in my product. The message was simple, but the weight of it was clear. This is just the beginning. The next few months were a blur of success, hard decisions, and calculated risks. My business was no longer a side hustle. It was a full-fledged company, and the world was starting to take notice. Revenue skyrocketed as more customers discovered what I'd created. The product we offered was simple yet innovative, and as word spread, bigger players in the market began showing interest. But it wasn't just about the sales anymore. It was about making sure that I stayed ahead, that I built something that couldn't be easily replicated. I had grown my team, hiring people who were smarter and more passionate than I had ever imagined. Each one of them brought something unique to the table, and together we were building something special. But as the company grew, so did my focus. I knew that if I was going to truly succeed, I needed to play the game at the highest level. That meant taking control of larger assets, ones that would give me the leverage I needed. That's when I set my sights on Mark's company. I had been tracking their stock, their revenue reports, and the internal workings for months. What I found was a company that had plateaued, a company that had grown stagnant despite all the external hype. Mark's team, though smart in their own right, were caught in a corporate culture that didn't value innovation. They were too comfortable, too complacent. That's where I saw my opportunity. I reached out to a few trusted investors and partners who had supported me along the way. My pitch was simple. I wanted to acquire Mark's company, but it wouldn't be a hostile takeover, at least not overtly. I needed to do this strategically, using my growing network and influence. I made an offer to buy a controlling stake in the company, presenting it as a partnership that would help Mark's firm modernize, scale, and grow. The truth was, I knew that what they needed wasn't just money. It was a complete restructuring, something I could provide without them even realizing who was behind it. It didn't take long for my offer to be accepted. Mark's company was in trouble, and though they were reluctant, they were willing to take a deal that promised them a lifeline. I wasn't about to let them know the real reason I was doing this. I didn't need to rub it in their faces. Not yet. In the meantime, my own company's growth didn't stop. I continued to build, expand, and adapt. Investors were eager to back me, recognizing the vision I had for the future. I wasn't interested in just making money. I was building an empire. Every move was strategic. Every decision was calculated. I was still working in the shadows. My family had no idea what I was up to. Whenever they asked how things were going, I played it off with a smile, downplaying the success. They thought of me as the same old Alex, the one who had nothing. But that was about to change. It was during a meeting with my board that I began to put the final pieces in place. We'd secured enough capital and had the right structure to go forward with an acquisition strategy. I could take over smaller companies and grow them organically, all while expanding my reach. But what I had in mind for Mark's company wasn't just about business, it was personal. I knew that once I took control, I'd have the perfect opportunity to put my family members in positions where they would have to report directly to me. Mark, especially, would be the first. He had always been the loudest, the one who had mocked me the most. But now, he was about to learn a hard lesson. A few weeks later, I received the news. The deal was done. Mark's company was officially under my control, and the first steps of restructuring were underway. I could barely contain my excitement. I had been planning this for so long, and now it was finally happening. But the real test was still to come. The next family gathering was only a few days away. I could already feel the tension building. Mark had been bragging non-stop about his big promotion at the company, and I had been silently biting my tongue, waiting for the right moment. It would be at this gathering where I would finally make my move, where I would reveal just how far I had come. But even more than that, it would be the moment when they realized they had underestimated me. The timing had to be perfect. It couldn't be rushed or too obvious. I needed them to be blindsided, to be completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. And that's exactly what I had planned. The night before the family dinner, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, rehearsing my speech. Tomorrow, they would all see me for who I truly was, not the failure they once knew, but the person who would now own their future. The night of the family dinner arrived, and I could feel the anticipation in the air. The same dinner where I had once been the laughingstock was now going to be the setting for my revelation. I could hear my family's laughter from across the street as I parked my car, the sounds of their conversations carrying through the open windows. Mark was probably talking about his latest achievements. Emily was no doubt chirping about some insignificant drama in her life, and my parents were likely still worried about me. But tonight, that would change. I took a deep breath as I stood outside my parents' house. The house still looked the same, with its peeling white paint and the smell of old furniture hanging in the air. It had always been a place of comfort for me, but now it felt like a stage. I wasn't just stepping into this house as Alex the underachiever. I was about to walk in as someone they would have to respect. Inside, the usual crowd was gathered, the same familiar faces around the table. Everyone was talking, eating, and laughing, unaware of what was coming. My mum greeted me with a warm smile, as always, though I could sense the usual concern in her eyes. "How are things going, Alex?" she asked, her voice carrying the slightest tinge of worry. "Good, Mom," I said, smiling back. I didn't give her the details. She didn't need to know yet. As I made my way into the dining room, I noticed Mark holding court with the rest of the family. His chest puffed out in that self-satisfied way that always grated on my nerves. He was talking about some new initiative at work, some project that he'd gotten to lead, his voice full of the kind of arrogance that made my blood boil. "I'm telling you, this project is going to change everything for our company," Mark said, looking around the room for approval. "They finally see my potential. I think I'm due for a promotion any day now." "Sounds like you're on the fast track, Mark," my dad chimed in, nodding approvingly. I smiled to myself, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. He had no idea what was coming. Dinner proceeded as it always did, with polite conversation and the occasional jab at my lack of a stable career. But I kept my cool, maintaining the calm exterior that I had carefully crafted. I knew that the time was approaching. Soon I would reveal everything. As dessert came around, I stood up, the clinking of my chair cutting through the chatter. "I have an announcement to make," I said, my voice steady but carrying enough weight to silence the room. Everyone turned to look at me, their attention immediately on me. Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting anything out of the ordinary. "I've been working on something big for the past year," I continued, watching their faces closely. "It's something that's changed my life, and tonight I'm going to share it with you." Mark snickered under his breath, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. He was probably assuming that I was going to talk about some small freelance gig or another of my failed ventures. "I know I've been quiet," I went on, "but I've been building something far bigger than I ever thought I could, and I've worked hard for every step of it. So here it is." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few quick taps, I opened the news article I had prepared earlier that day. It was a headline from the local business journal featuring my company's acquisition of Mark's company. I turned the screen towards my family, watching their expressions change in real time. The headline read, "Alex Morgan's company acquires tech firm X, a new era of innovation." For a moment, There was complete silence. My mom's mouth hung open, my dad's eyes widened, and Emily stared in disbelief. But it was Mark's reaction that I savored the most. His face turned pale as he realized what was happening. What is this?" Mark stammered, trying to keep his composure, but his voice faltered. "This is some kind of mistake." "No mistake," I said, a quiet smile forming on my lips. "It's the truth. I bought your company, Mark. I'm the one who owns it now. And as of today, I'm your CEO." The room was still. The air felt thick with shock, and I watched as Mark's expression shifted from disbelief to anger, then to embarrassment. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. My mom and dad exchanged looks, and Emily, never one for restraint, blurted, "Wait, you own the company Mark works for? The one he keeps bragging about?" "That's right," I said. "And, to make it official, I've already set the wheels in motion. Mark, you'll be reporting directly to me from now on. It's going to be a big change for you." Mark's face reddened with fury, but I could see the realization dawning on him. The person he had laughed at, the one he had so often belittled, had become the very force he now had to answer to. My heart raced, but I kept my composure. I was in control now. "Alex," Mark finally managed to say, his voice tight, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied. "You all mocked me, laughed at me, when I had nothing. Now look at where I am, and look at where you are." I let the words hang in the air, and for a moment there was no sound except for the heavy silence in the room. Mark shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't done yet. "Don't worry though," I continued. "You'll get used to it. I'll make sure you have a place in the company. I've got plenty of ideas for restructuring, and I think you'll find your new role challenging." The irony was delicious. I had never been one for revenge through cruelty, but this was the ultimate satisfaction. Watching Mark and the others struggle with the weight of their previous mockery was sweeter than anything else. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. As I looked around the table, I realized it wasn't just Mark who was in shock. Everyone was, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power that I hadn't known existed. But it wasn't just about the power, it was about the lesson. About proving that, no matter how hard they laughed at me, I would rise. I would always rise. As I stood there, the weight of the moment settling in, I realized this wasn't just a victory for me, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't succeed. And I would keep rising, no matter the cost. Weeks passed, and life inside the company began to shift. The restructuring I had promised was underway, and I made it my mission to lead with intelligence and fairness. For Mark and the others, it was a tough transition. Mark particularly struggled. The once confident junior executive now found himself in meetings where he had to defer to me, to take orders from someone he had once belittled. I could see the cracks in his facade. His ego was bruised, and he had no choice but to swallow his pride. But I wasn't here to tear him down. I was here to teach him a lesson. This wasn't about petty revenge or humiliating him. It was about showing him the power of perseverance, intelligence, and strategic thinking. I was determined to run this company the way it deserved to be run, efficiently, innovatively, and with respect for every person in the room, no matter their past mistakes. Even Mark. I kept him on board, but I made sure his role was one that would force him to prove himself in a way he never had before. I didn't make his job easy. He had to work harder than he ever had. But it wasn't just him. Everyone was held accountable, including my other family members who worked for the company now. They were forced to adapt, to grow, and to respect the fact that I wasn't the same person they had laughed at all those years ago. Months went by, and Mark's frustration grew. At family gatherings, he'd try to mask his resentment with forced smiles and thinly veiled jabs, but I could see through it. I didn't need his approval anymore. In fact, I didn't need any of their approval. I had built this company on my own terms, and I wasn't about to let their past mockery define me. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, the company gala. It was the perfect opportunity to bring everything full circle. The night was elegant, grand, and filled with the kind of success I had worked so hard to achieve. Employees mingled with investors, and the press had shown up to cover the event. It wasn't just a celebration of the company's success, it was a celebration of the journey I had taken to get here, and the lessons I had learned along the way. As the night wore on, I took the stage to deliver a speech. I could feel my family's eyes on me, especially Mark's. His resentment had softened over time, but I knew that deep down, he still couldn't fathom how I had gone from nothing to this. I wasn't the same person who had once sat at their dinner table, humiliated and unsure. I was a leader now, someone whose presence demanded respect. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating the success of this company. It's about celebrating the journey we've all been on. A journey that hasn't been easy. A journey that has required vision, resilience, and the belief that, no matter how many times you fall, you can always rise again." I paused, scanning the room. My family was seated at the back, their expressions varying from admiration to confusion. Mark's eyes were fixed on me, but I could tell he was trying to figure out what I was about to say. I've been told countless times that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't have what it takes, and honestly, there were times when I almost believed them. But if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that other people's doubts don't have to define your reality. Their mockery doesn't have to become your truth. I let the words settle in the air, allowing them to resonate with everyone in the room. Then, I continued. "I'm here tonight, standing before you as the CEO of a company that I built from the ground up. A company that, despite all the odds, has become a success. And I want to say thank you, not just to my team, but to everyone who ever doubted me, because you gave me the fuel to prove you wrong." A wave of silence swept over the room. My family was still processing my words, but I could see it in their eyes. They finally understood. They finally realized that everything I had done, every decision I had made, had been with the intent to not just rise above them, but to show them the strength of quiet determination. I smiled as I took a breath, the final words coming to me with clarity. "Power is sweetest when it's earned, and even sweeter when you share it wisely," I concluded. "Here's to the future, ours together." As I finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was genuine admiration. I could see the respect in my family's eyes. Even Mark, though his pride was still bruised, couldn't deny the truth. I had earned this. I had fought for it, and I had done it on my own terms. Later that evening, Mark approached me in a quiet corner of the venue. His face was tired, his eyes weary, but there was something else in them now, acknowledgement. "I didn't think it was possible," he said, his voice low. "But you did it. You really did it." "I told you I would," I said, my voice calm, but with a hint of satisfaction. "I didn't need your approval, Mark. But I think now you can see what I've built." He nodded slowly, his eyes betraying a mix of respect and lingering frustration. "Yeah, I see it now, and I'll admit, I was wrong." I looked at him for a moment, the weight of everything we had both gone through hanging in the air. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding. Mark had been just as much a part of my journey as anyone else, but I had surpassed him in ways he never expected. And that was the sweet victory. not in revenge, but in the silent satisfaction of knowing that my success had come from my own hands, not anyone else's. As the night drew to a close, I stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. I thought about everything I had been through, how far I had come. I wasn't just the person who had once been laughed at. I was now the person who had built something meaningful, something that would endure. My past, my family's doubts, they were just stepping stones to this moment. And this was only the beginning. With a quiet smile, I turned away from the window, ready for the next chapter. The world was mine to shape, and this time no one could ever laugh at me again.